Hi, Audrey. Nice for you to come and have a chat with me. I
It's a
just wondered whether
pleasure.
you could introduce yourself to everybody.
Yes, of course I can. My name's Audrey Bodman. I'm a trainer and consultant that specialises in actually three particular areas: employer engagement, which you know I love, customer service, and sales. And that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years.
I think it's fascinating because when I first came into supported employment many years ago, is we were writing the book as we went. We were sort of coming in, we were trying to find jobs for people with learning disabilities. One of the things that I noticed that everyone was scared of was employer engagement, which is why I think it's been fantastic that you've been one of the people in the field that has actually really been successful in actually helping so many people in supported employment actually feel
Yeah.
more confident at employer engagement. I just wondered whether you could tell me how you got started.
Oh my giddy ant pants. Um, Well, do you know what? I was thinking about it the other day, and I didn't even know it was supported employment, to be honest with you. But I started my self-employment journey in the early 1990s. I used to work in newspapers at the Nottingham Evening Post, and I was pregnant with my son and decided to leave there and set up my own business. Right. So
Very
what was
brave.
quite, yeah, tell me about it. Literally, let's just have a go and see how I get on. But in between that time, I became part-time a job club leader. And
Right.
that role involved getting people back into work. At that time, there was no such thing as supported employment. But when I set up my own business, um, I recognized that actually getting people into work was really important. And one of the first clients I ever had a contract with Capita actually, and they had a big contract with the DWP. And their role was to get more people back into work. And I was very fortunate. I started a relationship with a lady called Amanda Wadsworth, who was part of the Access to Work team in the Northwest, who's now got an MBE actually, and Margaret Tuller. And that's how I started to get involved in supported employment, because I started to realize that I was working with organizations that were trying to make reasonable adjustments to positions, which I later on realized was supported employment. And that's how it started in the early days, picking up this very large contract as a training provider on behalf of Capita, who won the DWP contract. And that's how I got into supported employment.
Right. I mean, for us, I mean, for me, actually, we started in 1986,
Yeah.
and it was very new. And I remember struggling to find, I remember struggling to find anyone who could help people sell.
Yeah.
I'd come from a selling background. I'd come back down to London from the north, and I'd done any job. You know, when you trying to find a job, but you do any job. And I'd ended up selling health and safety training courses.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, not the easiest job to have, but actually it taught me one of the greatest things, which was about being able to sell to people.
Yeah.
And so I was confident about being able to approach employers. But when I started with an employment agency, I found that most of my colleagues I was working with were great, often a lot better with me about training the candidates and doing all the sort of notes and everything else. But when it came to actually just getting a job, going to an employer and persuading an employer that actually this would be a really good thing for them to do,
Yeah.
they struggled and they were frightened. And I still think today there is that fear of
Massive.
the employer.
This is why I'm still here, Robert. 30 years later, I'm still here.
Yeah.
And part of that is because when people are working in the supported employment sector, you have a perception about the fact that you're going to ring an employer to talk to them about an individual. You don't believe that what I'm getting is they don't believe they are salespeople. Salespeople are for other people. You know, somebody said to me the other day, a supported employment or company, we don't sell widgets, we don't sell cars, so it's not sales,
But they
right?
do.
But you are selling an impression, you are selling a service, you are selling the attributes of the individuals you're speaking to. And
And
I
the
think
benefits of your service.
absolutely. And if we've got to remember that when you are talking about supported employment, you are asking for support from an employer to make reasonable adjustments. Now, if that is the case, then there has to be an element of influence. You know, you've got to motivate that employer to think, well, actually, yeah, this seems a great thing. And so the reason I love the sector is because I keep saying, when we approach an employer, whether that be by phone, by face-to-face is irrelevant. The idea is that we are in a way representing that individual we're trying to find work. So our role is to educate employers. There's so much stigma, you know, people with disabilities, some employers have preconceived ideas. We should be embracing that we're going to meet those employers because we want to voice what the benefits are. So I feel, and I think what I've noticed as well, Robert, which is quite sad actually, is in the sector, a lot of people have anxiety around making calls, around sales.
And this might make you laugh, is when we first started, there was 4 of us in an organisation we were called Blake's Wharf Employment Services, and we were all about in our early 20s. And so we were actually realised that actually phoning employers was actually something that people felt self-conscious of. So we actually did a thing, and we said, right, it was the days before mobile phones, so you know, you had your old virtual dial-up phones, and we would say to people, right, okay, I'm going to call employers, and everyone else would leave the room and have a tea break, because then you didn't feel self-conscious of listening, of other people listening in. And we made this rule of, well, okay, if you phone an employer and it all went bad, it went bad, but don't worry about it. Pick up the phone to the next one. And we had weird rules that worked. Things like no point phoning the employer when you've got up in the morning and you've had a parking ticket and you're late for work, and you've had a row with your partner or something, that you were not going to be, that wasn't going to be your day. There was times when it was good, I think, to be saying, right, I'm good today and I'm going to phone and pick up an employer.
Absolutely. There's no, in my eyes, there is no such thing as a bad call, because the one thing that you will gain from a call, whether it be positive or negative, is that you will learn something.
Yeah.
You will learn something. You know, we send emails to employees, we don't actually get anything back. But when you're speaking on the phone or you're face to face, you can read body language, and employers want to pick up our energy. You know, how do we feel about that individual that we're trying to place? They kind of they feel that from us. And I just felt, for me, I love what I do, Robert. I really love what I do because it's making a difference.
I always found the biggest buzz for me was getting someone a job. You'd spend hours and hours doing a vocational profile. And bear in mind, it was often people who was assumed this person cannot work. And if you actually spent some time and you managed to persuade an employer that you could get, first of all, an interview, and then you got them starting a job, it was the greatest buzz that you'd actually got someone a job. And that was another thing that we did informally. We didn't make a competition, but we actually did this bit about celebrating success. And I'm not sure that happens enough as it should do. I don't know what your observations are around the sector.
I sometimes feel it doesn't happen enough because they have other objectives, like that, you know, the feeling is got to get job starts, outcomes, and that kind of dilutes that. But there are a lot of organisations out there that do celebrate it. You know, it is down to the initial organisation, supported employment organisation, who has a really robust induction plan that gets people buying in straight away. I just want to go off track slightly.
Yeah, do. That's what it's about today.
Yeah, this week I've been on the judging panel for the BASE Awards in November. And the one that I've sponsored is the David Granger Award, which is all about the individual.
That's brilliant. I love the David Granger Award.
I love it.
Do you want to explain a little bit what the David Granger Award is?
Why would you do that? Why would you do that now? Well, the David Granger Award is to evidence of an individual who has gone into the workplace, who has shown that they have overcome barriers of any form of disability. Not only have they overcome barriers, but they've actually helped others in similar situations. They've inspired others, not just work, but colleagues, but also other people. One of the things I loved about the award, which I noticed this week, is that we went through all the applications. There were quite a lot of applications this year. Every employer that talked about their individual that came from a supported employment organization, they were happy, they were smiling, we could not do without this person, they have made a major difference, they have been able to do this, this and this. And it's telling me again and again how important it is that we kind of scream from the rooftops that there are individuals out there, whatever their lived condition is, that can find work if we invest our time into, not just we talk about employers investing time into them. So this is why I love the David Granger Award, because it really does put a spotlight on those individuals and organizations that really push for making sure people are included. It's all about inclusion, isn't it? That's
it's
a
fantastic award, and I think it's fantastic because it shows two things. It shows the harmony between the candidate who's got a job and is doing really, really well, and has probably gone above what they expected to begin with themselves, but also the employer and their colleagues are how delighted the person is winning the award, but also it shows how that they have become more inclusive. And I think that's one of the greatest things that award always brings.
Yes.
And it shows how, if we get this right, how supported employment works. It's always a partnership. It's a partnership between the supported employment agency, the training of the person that's been introduced, so making sure good things are done, like good job analysis, and the partnership of bringing the employer along without making it difficult for the employer, so that they become part of that person's journey. And I think when it happens, and the David Granger Award for the British Association of Supported Employment, I think is one of the most fantastic awards, and everyone is virtually in tears usually at that part of the evening.
I love it. I was a bit. I tell you what, though, this one of the things is, like, when we're trying to put people into work with disabilities. I was speaking to somebody a few weeks ago, and they were saying, she was making a call. She says, I'm not going to ring construction companies. I'm not going to ring building companies. And I said, why not? She says, they're not going to be sympathetic. They're going to be quite tough with them, and they're certainly not going to make any reasonable adjustments. Yeah, within this award that we were looking at for the David Granger Award, there was a lot of industries of that type that would put people forward, and to see that the individual they put forward with their workmates all going, Robert's a great guy, we love him, we love when his enthusiasm is infectious, he's here before we are, all those sort of traits.
I think it's something where it's so important in your job in helping train people is to break down the barriers.
Yeah.
I was fortunate. I think I was fortunate because I came from a working class background. So my area is full of people, fathers who were miners and steel workers. And I came from that area where I knew that working class people didn't have those prejudices. They actually did want people to get on, and they wanted things to happen. But I think it's really important in your job is to help people who make those assumptions. I'd be scared to phone a construction company because they're loud and they're brash and they're big and they talk loud, that they are going to be anti my candidate, because actually those are the barriers that we need to break down. But actually, the barriers that need to be broken down are, I think, often are with the employment consultants ourselves, who often come from a different background and we need to sort of change that sort of stereotype, I think.
I would, you've just took the words out of my mouth. I would say that when I'm running training sessions, and often the questions I get asked when I'm about to do the training is, Audrey, what would you say when we get discrimination on the phone and people are being, they're saying things like, they're not going to take our type of clients and stuff like that. I say, what do you mean by our type of clients? You know, why are you using that phrase? And when it comes down to it, there's a high percentage of consultants themselves who have their own preconceived ideas and unconscious bias and all those other things that come with it. And I say, you know, let's not forget that when we pick up the phone to make a call, or when we meet somebody, we're trying to create first impressions first, before we do anything else. So I do feel there is some work that needs to be done in the sector with the consultants themselves, and also then go through to the employers and everybody else involved, other parties involved, definitely.
I mean, there's that phrase, isn't it? You know, prepare to fail, and then you will fail. And I think there is that bit where we need to get with employment consultants this idea about, we have to be positive. We have to phone employers with that positive outlook that they're going to be positive.
Yes.
And sometimes I describe it like a tip of an iceberg. We're often working with maybe the 1/10 of the employers, but actually with those 1/10 of the employers, if we do our job right, then that seeps down slower and slower to other employers. And once you've got one employer on board, then I find that you get other employers on board. I was really fortunate to be speaking in Romania at the end of a program called the LEAD program, which was about helping other organizations in other countries become supported employment agencies. What was really lovely was that 3 years before, I'd done some training with an employment consultant in Constanta in Romania, and she'd gone around to show me and talk to an employer that was new.
Yeah.
And it was really nice because that employer got it, and that employer was one of the first employers in Romania to take on a person with learning disability, and was extolling the virtues of this and how it had changed and transformed how they were working and how they were thinking. And then I went to the conference, and lo and behold, it was that employer who was going at that conference and then explaining to other employers how this wasn't a leap in the dark. This was actually something that should be necessary for other employers to do. And then you suddenly realize that's why good employer engagement, it stemmed from that employment consultant picking up the phone on a chance of just saying, do you have any jobs? Making sure she had the right candidate, making sure she did the right training, but actually helping that employer on board. And then the employer gives back. And that's one of the greatest things, I think, is if you do this right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always feel that employer engagement is all about getting people involved. That, in a nutshell, it's the earpiece is coming out. It's working at finding ways to make whatever you're doing attractive to an employer. And a lot of the things I'm noticing, Robert, is that we don't ask enough questions. You know, if we are trying to get somebody with a disability into work, then our questions should kind of help us get there. You know, asking questions about making it clear that you're trying to find more inclusive employers. By using the word inclusive employers, we're now saying to them, bit later on the call, when I talk about my individual, you know, if my individual has allowed me to share information, then you're then going to explain that's why you mentioned the word inclusive. But, you know, one of the issues is that we go on the phone just treating it like any other call, and it's not. Supported employment is a special, unique offering to employers, and it has to be approached in that way.
I often think I mean, obviously the word supported employment came in the late 70s and early 80s, and the words were very different. If you were to describe, if you were able to name the sector and supported employment government, what would you name our sector instead of supported employment?
I'd say inclusive.
Yeah.
Inclusive.
I think myself is I think, you know, we are, I mean, the word inclusive in the 80s wasn't quite there, and I do think it gives the wrong impression sometimes, and it's a bit like a trademark, and sometimes it's something I think that we as a sector maybe need to think about as
Yeah,
is, do we need to change the name of our trademark, even though that will maybe cause a little confusion for a while. And for me, I think it is
that
probably time to think about it.
that is a very interesting point, because again, I'm at some of the conversations I hear and listen to when somebody said they were calling from an organisation that works with people, helps them into work, and we provide a supported employment service. The feedback that this particular employer said, oh, supported, well, you know, we haven't got extra room, we can't have somebody else in helping, you know, in their eyes it was going to be very time constraint, productivity was going to be lost because they're going to get somebody else trying to help. And so I do feel that sometimes to us the word supported is jargon in a way.
Yeah.
To an employer.
So actually, you raise a really good point. Someone once said to me, our particular industry has the most jargon ever than any
Caseload.
other industry out. And I think we
Caseload
have
is the
to
word.
really think about that, especially when we're trying to sell our services to other people.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, definitely. And the thing is, and when you're trying to sell your services to other people and you're doing it face to face, of course, people can see your body language, they can see what you're doing, and it's a lot easier. When the body language is gone and all you've got are words and the tone of your voice, you've got to get that right.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to choose the right type of words.
I remember when I first started, I started for a council employment service. And it was very interesting. We used the word, hello, phoning Blake's employment service. We would 99% of the time the gatekeeper would put the phone down on us because they didn't want to sort of someone trying to sell recruitment to them.
Yeah.
So we changed that, and we changed it to using the council. So we said, phone on behalf of Hammersmith and Fulham Council, and you often got past the gatekeeper.
Absolutely.
And what I often try and say to people, it's about adapting. If you keep on failing in one way, and if you raise it earlier, on every call you learn something. Well, if you
Absolutely.
learn that what you're saying, the gatekeeper, and what I mean by the gatekeeper, the receptionists, when
Yeah.
people could afford a receptionist, but the receptionist who would say, oh no, he's busy, meaning no, he's never going to talk to you.
Yeah.
You often got, if you approach that receptionist in a different way, you will be put through, and of course that's what you
Yeah.
want. You the
Absolutely.
little steps all the way, and it's about adapting and learning for me.
100%. That scenario you've just given is a fantastic one for me to talk about, actually, because the olden days, the 1990s and early, late
Early
90s,
80s.
you'd get away with a bit of recruitment, saying the word recruitment in not in a bad way. But now, when you say I'm ringing about recruitment, you've got to remember we've got different types of recruitment services out there now. We've got the supported employment, we've got the restarts and all the other services. We've got the traditional recruitment agency that charges a fee. So, some people say to me, shall I use the word recruitment? And I say, well, you can use the word recruitment if you can recover from any knockbacks that you get.
Yes.
Right? So that's the first thing. If you don't want to use the word recruitment, you say, I'm ringing in with connection with any potential job opportunities. Right? So it's you are using the word potential, which then says straight away, I'm not like jumping down your throat, but you say job opportunities. And so that kind of makes it slightly softer. And I think this is what makes me smile about the supported employment sector and other sectors very similar is if I go in to do training, I'm told sometimes, don't mention the word sales or cold calling. Don't mention it. Don't say it. Just call it employer engagement. Because what happens is people are, as soon as they hear the word business development, sales, or anything like that, they start thinking of the negative instead of the positive. So it reminds me that the words that we use and how people perceive them is part of the problem.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, I've picked up the phone many times on people who, as soon as they say something, I think, oh, I know they're trying to sell me something. I don't want to know.
They
And yet
sound
other
salesy.
people, but other people who are also selling to me, if they approach me right and in the right way, then that works. I think that's a very important aspect. Is part of employer engagement is sometimes I think the word is wrong. It's we're engaging with a person at the other end,
Yeah.
and we make a monolith of the employer as if the employer is the enemy, and
Yeah.
yet we're dealing, I always think, with people. So it's around talking to a person as another person.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
listening, and again, sorry, you said something that we don't ask enough questions.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh,
when we have the chance, we need to listen to what the employers are saying or the person is saying to us, so we can attune and we can adapt.
but they don't, but a lot of people don't listen though. So they'll go on the phone, we'll go on the phone. This happens all the time, and they've got somebody in mind, they've got somebody who might have a disability. They haven't seen a job advertised, but they want to do a bit of job carving, you know, they want to have a conversation around that. And they just jump on the phone and they go, do you have any vacancies? And they go, no. Oh, all right then, thank you. And they put the phone down, go away.
And they don't think
Or,
about work experience or
yeah, or
having a relationship.
absolutely. Or they, do you have any vacancies? No. And they'll get no. And they'll go, oh, well, what we do? And they'll just go, blur.
Yeah,
So either option, they're getting rejection. And that's what causes the anxiety behind it. Instead of actually thinking to ourselves when we pick up the phone or face to face, first thing's got to come first is our energy, the energy that we
yeah.
bring to actually having these conversations with employers, because it's that energy that initially catches on and the enthusiasm. And then, like you said, Robert, earlier, it's knowing that you've got the right person, but more importantly, that sort of research you've done prior to any connection
I
that
think
will
the
open
bit about
doors.
research is the bit that really winds me up. Today, we have everything that can give you the tips of your fingertips with Google and different search engines, as much information, not only about the company, but probably about the person as well. Um, and yet people are so lazy in not thinking, I've got an appointment with this supermarket or with this garage, and have no information, and therefore maybe trying to sell a job to the person when the garage is in midst of
Yeah, that.
restructuring and redundancy. And it annoys me in a way because it's part of the job. I used to be saying to employment consultants at the time, is before Google and before the advent, is you should always buy a decent Sunday paper so that you could look at the business news and that you should have an idea of what's happening in the employer's world, to give you an idea so that you knew when recessions were coming. You
Yeah.
had a, you know, it's part and parcel of the job for me. It's as much
Yeah,
about that as about training your candidate to do the job properly.
absolutely. There is no excuse in 2023 to not have done research when you've got things like LinkedIn and labor market information and all these things at the tips of your fingers, to ring up an employer and say, can you tell me what you do? I heard somebody do that today. Oh, can you tell me what you do? And I'm like, have you
Mm.
not looked at the website? Have you not? And I think what's quite frightening for me is that we become the handbrake. So we are the person preventing that actual person, customer that we've got from getting work because we're not doing the right things, or we're feeling very negative about making calls. So, oh, I'm not making employer engagement calls, or I just don't like doing it. Well, are you saying to me then that you don't like doing it, and as a result of that, you're not bothered about the customer that you've just helped?
Of course, I mean, it's the biggest thing is that, we have candidates who are often wrongly judged that they are unable to work. And we are trying to get society in that social model of disability to actually help people into jobs. If we don't talk and we don't get employers on board, that's never going to happen. So
Yeah,
it is that sort of reset, and it's interesting. One of the questions I got was, why do you think our sector employer engagement is so poor? Because in the 35 years I've been involved, I don't think it's improved vastly, and that's probably down to the likes of myself and other people,
yeah.
that we've not been able to get that message across, and we're still in that situation, I think.
I just feel that we just continue to have preconceived ideas about what we need to do to get people into work. And that doesn't involve, in some people's eyes, of communicating in the right way with employers. You know, the olden days, Robert, where 80% of your time was you were able to spend with your customer, and 20% was spent trying to find the employer. So you had loads of time to do that. Nowadays, it's turned it's on its head.
It shouldn't do though in supported employment agencies that are good. I mean, if you're working with learning disabilities, you should really be working with more than 20 people. Or same with severe and enduring mental health needs. I think if you're working with too many, that's an organisational problem.
Yeah, definitely.
And actually, organisations need to see that if the employment consultant has 70 to 80 candidates, of course there's going to be no proper employer engagement.
Yeah.
And I think they have to look at sometimes less is more.
100%. Less is more. And also it's about quality rather than quantity. You know, the quality conversations that we have with our employers and our customers can make a difference. And also one of the other things I think that we fall down with it is because we have no strategy. So there's no real strategy to actually approaching employers. You know, yes, we approach this organization, but what's the next step, and what's the next step, and what's the one after that? It tends to be very transactional, because that's how you feel at the time.
You might be interested to know, we had a conversation, if you remember, in Leeds last year, because we were stationed next to each other on certain parts, and we spent most of the time sort of talking about employer engagement. And one of those is, I did say that I wanted to see if we could get the European Union Supported Employment have a employer engagement bid through Erasmus. You might be pleased to know that that was successful, and that the British Association of Supported Employment will be part of it, which is really good. That, I'm hoping, is going to help in looking at the sector as much as the quality standards and the toolkit has done before. That I think that is great that we've managed to get British Association Supported Employment to be part of that. And it's something that I'm hoping as a legacy going forward is something that we can be saying, this is a hallmark of what employer engagement should be.
That's best practice.
This is best practice, and that's what I'm hoping that we can be showing to the sector. And I think that's, I'm pleased that we've got that, because I think it, if we've done right, this could make a tremendous.
Can I ask you a question, Robert? Do you feel that funding and resources have an impact on what's happening in the sector?
Massively. For me, I'm a small to medium-sized charity. We are not a council-run service, and we are one of the first services to ever get cut if the council loses money. Most commissioners have no real thought about what quality is. So the word full cost recovery, I think, has disappeared from the lexicon since 2008 and never seems to return. In fact, there was a recent tender we were involved in where they were honestly saying that the tender would not cover the full cost of delivering the service. So then if you say, in an ideal world, there was someone who I used to know before you, he sadly died 10 years ago, from base, called Fred. And I remember Hugh in one of the conversations was talking about the fact that he came on board and he was an employer, and his job was as an employer engagement person. And that employment agency could employ someone whose role it was just to be engaging with employers. And there was often a debate went on, and it's still an open debate, of whether you're best having all your employment consultants doing the employer engagement, or that you had one specific person who was good at it and then doing it. And I think the jury is always out as how successful that would be. It's a bit like football. Do you have one up front, or do you have two people up front? It's very.
I'd like to touch on that in a minute.
Yeah, well, actually, it's that, and we will go back to that. But yes, I think funding has a structural problem. for employment agencies, and I think structurally they'll put the employment consultant with the candidates because that's what the funder wants to see. But the funder doesn't always realize is really one of a big sector of candidates or clients is the employers.
Yeah, definitely. I want to go back to
Yeah.
what you said a minute ago, which I think is really important about, and I get this asked a lot. If you're in an organization, supported employment organization, and you've got job coaches, and the question I'm asked often is, do we just get a dedicated 2 or 3 people who do like picking up the phone and making those interactions, or do we get all the job coaches trained as well? My answer to that has always been, get the job coaches trained as well. The reason I say that is because the employer engagement people will do what they've got to do and they're used to that. But what happens when a job coach is speaking to somebody, a customer, who has a niche need? That's not in the mainstream. So are we saying that because it's not in the mainstream, they have to kind of wait until the employer engagement person can do it? Or what happens if the employer engagement is ill? So it's that continuity that's really key.
I totally agreed with you, but I often wondered whether I agreed with you because I came from a background of not worrying about talking to employers. And I sometimes, because I used to think it was much better that you got everyone who was confident of talking to employers, and some would be better. And I've got employment consultants in my service who I have seen grown into absolutely brilliant at talking to employers who were actually scared of talking to the employers in the beginning. And I think it's about staff development. And I think it's something that some people will excel and be
and some
better than
people won't.
others. But I think everyone should be able to understand and have that knowledge. So for me, I've always been that everyone should be doing employer engagement. It doesn't have any harm if there is someone who has that expertise, who has a specific role of just generally talking with employers around disability confidence
absolutely.
and that area. And I think that's a bit that with the funding we have, we never seem to get. And it's always about how many candidates can you get and not how can we move the employers on. I have to say, I think disability confident has helped. Disability confident for me is better than the previous one, which was the 2 ticks symbol.
Oh yeah, I remember the 2 ticks.
Which was for me particularly dispiriting. I would use it just purely to say that you've got the 2 ticks and therefore you need to be able to offer my candidate an interview, and that's but usually if an organization had 2 ticks, you could almost guarantee they wouldn't take your employer on, your candidate on.
Oh really?
And I think disability confident has changed. I don't know what your view is. Disability confident.
I'm not going to comment on that because I do know that one of the things that people used to say to me when they were making calls was, we've got a disability confident list, or in fact, it wasn't disability confident, it was a 2 ticks list. So they felt that they'd got that and they'd got a hook to get in with that organization. I mean, let's be honest, if you've got something to kind of have a conversation about, that's always a great start, isn't it?
I think I think disability confident is a lot harder to achieve. And I think when certain employers achieve it, they move on to becoming disability confident champions. And I think
brilliant.
that has made a huge difference. I'll give you an example. In Croydon, we had a number of decent disability confident champions because of Emma Shepherd, who was leading the employment service there. And within that, we had reverse job fairs. And reverse job fairs, I think, were very, very interesting because, you had to help the employers talk to the candidates. But it was very interesting, even then on a reverse job fair, how few people wanted to be chaperoning and helping the employers talk to the candidates.
When you say reverse job fairs, I've not heard that term before. Can you expand on that? And I've
Right,
heard reverse marketing,
it's
but
a really good, it's a unique idea, and it works. Normally, when you go to a job fair, you have loads of candidates going around to desks of employers,
that's right.
and the employer sits behind the desk looking like this, and then the person goes, "Oh, hello, I'm Johnny, and here's my
Just like that.
CV." And he says, "Why are you applying for this job?" Reverse job fairs are the other way around. You see, you'll have
Oh,
something like status employment with maybe about 5 or 6 other agencies, and maybe you'll have 4 or 5 candidates that you've done some work with, and they're at the stage where they're wanting to apply for the jobs, and you've got an employment consultant with them that knows everything about them, and so you've done all the preparation with them, and then you invite employers to come round to a reverse job fair where they come
oh,
around and they have to go and they have to talk to the candidate. And you have
oh,
places
that's
where
brilliant. I like
you may
that.
have quiet rooms, and you might have areas where the person goes down, and what's really important, you need chaperones.
Oh,
So you need
yeah,
someone
that's
like
very good.
yourself or me or someone, another person, where the employer comes in and you say to the employer, "Oh, what vacancies are you looking for?" And they might say admin.
Yeah.
You need to be in these fairs not competitive, which is something that you need to be honest and think, that other agency has someone who wants an admin job. I'll take that employer to speak to him first, because
Oh, right.
and then you come and you say, "Oh, Greg, this is Adam, and Adam's looking for an administration job," and you help get that conversation
That's a great
started.
idea. How comes I've not heard about how comes is there any
Our every day is a school day, Audrey,
wow,
and
that's a
and
lovely
and
one.
and, and I'll after this call, I'll give you more information.
Yes,
But
I'd like to know about
Emma
them.
Shepherd and is really, and I believe Northern Ireland Union of Support Employment are going to
Yeah,
be
I know
running one
them.
in December. So there are good ideas, and they're a good way
Yeah,
of
lovely.
alternative recruitment. We found, and that's a direct result from Disability Confident, because employers came more on board and became and their fears were allayed a bit, and we got a lot of success out of the reverse job fairs, and
Yeah.
ultimately so did our candidates.
I tell you where that's slightly similar to something else I've seen, where I've had individuals who have spoke to an employer, let's say by phone. The employer hasn't got a vacancy at the moment or hasn't got an opportunity, but what the employer has agreed to do, because they've been asked, is to come along and do a Teams little presentation of 10 to 15 minutes on their information about their organisation, do's and don'ts, the pluses and minuses of doing this role.
Yeah,
And I've individuals that are setting up those sort of meetings with employers, which is at the start of the relationship building that
yeah.
they're
I,
doing.
I
That
think all
works
of those
really well.
ideas are brilliant. I mean, I used to get employers as well when I was an employment consultant say, "Well, you haven't got any vacancies, but could you do some mock interviews?"
Yeah,
And I've
absolutely.
got some candidates who are looking for jobs like yours. Oh, I would have said 9 times out of 10 when I started that, nearly always I got someone placed into that employer at a later stage, at some
Yeah,
stage. And
yeah,
it's
it's
a bit
brilliant.
about sort of, and as I say, it's trying to get people to remember that you need to talk to people as people, and employers are just the same as you and me. They're
Absolutely.
not ogres. And I think the sector generally tries to put employers as some form of a different
Mm.
species almost.
Yeah. They
It's
just
weird.
employers have a need, a problem, and they just want organisations like ours to solve it for them. And that's how
Yeah.
we have to look at it. We're just trying to find those organisations that are willing to take one of our customers on board. Excuse me,
Mm.
my boxer dog has just decided to come into the room as I'm speaking to you.
That's
Sorry about
okay.
that.
I mean, just look into the future, and that's what I'm doing at the minute. Is what challenges do you think are ahead for supported employment, and sort of trying to get more valued employment for people with a disability.
I feel that looking in the future, the stigma and the discrimination is still going to be one of the issues. But I do feel that we need to be putting things in place now to give consultants the resources to put across like case studies of breaking down those stigmas and discriminations. I'm surprised that I see a lot of organisations approaching employees but don't have any case studies where they've actually placed somebody and it's going beautifully after reasonable adjustments and using that. So that will continue to be a problem if we don't look at doing things like that. And the funding and resources come into it as well in the future, if we're not looking at actually trying to put things into things that really do need.
It's been a big worry of mine in the past 3 or 4 years, is that I've seen in the UK where disability hate has gone up, and all of a sudden we seem to be going slightly backwards from, you know, words that I didn't that I'd not heard since the 80s or can come back into things, and this assumption that, you know, people can't do things, and with the advent of technology, I worry that, you know, people will get left behind because there's not the imagination to try and help them move ahead. So I do have those, but I think, you know, the young people in the sector, you know, we've done a lot of what they haven't done. I think there's a lot of hope in the sector, and I think there's in the sector going forward. I think some of the young people, they're the ones who are going to be taking this forward, and I think, you know, I always want to see people who are quite angry at the system a little bit, or who want to change things, and being able to do that.
Yeah, I would say the other thing that's made me think about the future is remote working.
Yes.
Because there's plus to that for, you know, a lot of people might have disabilities and actually would prefer to be working from home. And now, since what's happened with the pandemic, they've got more chance of doing that. But equally, there's lots of organisations that don't want working from home. And, you know, and perhaps people who are working from home want to get out. You know, mental health is being affected. There's all these other things.
I think there's a really important part of that is, and it's something that I wanted to do and we haven't managed to get funding for, but to create what I would call support hubs for those very people who their jobs are remote working, but they don't actually want to work isolated. I was slightly concerned when the government had said that when they were looking at people with disabilities could work at home. And part of the parcel of, for me, about the value of supported employment was that people could actually get out and they were socially included. And I was worried about that. I think you're right. Some people, and I have a particular employment consultant who sometimes works at home, but sometimes it's much better that he actually comes into the office. And I worry about that if we are isolating people, we're missing some of the values that were. I think these are challenges for my younger colleagues, but what I'm hoping is that we carry on. I'm hoping that people like yourself keep in this sector to keep on showing people that actually
I'm not going anywhere.
Employer engagement is actually fun. It's actually a big part of the job. It's something that actually, you know, getting someone into employment is the biggest buzz. Actually getting an employer understanding that getting that person an employer was a big buzz for them. That's tremendous. That's what keeps you going when things don't go quite right for me.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel that's it. We have to keep remembering our why. Why are we in these roles that we're in? We're doing it because we want to make a difference, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah. So, Audrey, can I just say thank you? I'm looking forward to having a chat with you in Leicester. I'm hoping you're going to be in Leicester with the base.
Of course, I'm doing a workshop.
Of course you are, and you're going to be actually presenting the award. You're going to be doing the prize of the David Granger
and exhibiting as well. Yes.
Oh, looking forward, and so I'm looking forward to catching up with you in Leicester. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much,
Audrey.
Robert. Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thank you.